I originally learned to graft from a friend who was a handful of years ahead of me in his farming career. We stood in his garage on a cold, dreary March day over a dozen years ago, and he taught me how to bench graft. From that moment on, I was hooked, and the more I've learned about all forms of grafting, the history of apple trees, their care and maintenance, I've become more and more fascinated, seeking out any information I can find. In that search, I found information about care of apple trees is a bit like the story of Jesus I learned as a kid. He was born, then, decades later, all the important stuff happened. You graft and plant the tree, then years later it starts to fruit and you prune. But nothing is that simple. What about all the years in between? What do you need to do between planting and harvesting to help your trees? Heck, forget years later. What happens just after you plant or graft your trees in the same year? It's hard to find information about that. The first and perhaps most important thing you need to do is protect your trees from all the creatures that would love nothing more than to approach them like an all-you-can-eat salad bar. This is known as animal pressure, and it will vary by region and even at different points throughout the year. Here in central Maine, the biggest year-round threat is deer. I call this the Northeast Orchard, and it's outside the electric fence that surrounds my annual production garden. Therefore, these trees have faced a lot of deer pressure over the past 5 years. I've discussed this in a different video where I compare these trees to others planted at the same time but that are protected by an electric fence. Barring electricity, which I cannot really access on this part of the Nights and Weekends Homestead, I was determined after top working these this spring to protect them. I decided on small physical barriers made from chicken wire fencing and fiberglass posts. So far it's working, but they need to be adjusted since the trees are doing so well. A nice problem to have. Next, and this is the thing about which it seems to be hardest to find information, you need to prune your trees in the first year to a single stem, if possible. I shouldn't say need. You don't need to do anything. If the graft takes, the tree will grow. And really, even if the graft doesn't take, the tree will grow. But we'll get to that in a minute. While a tree left to its own devices will grow, it may not grow the way you want. And in the realm of fruit trees on the homestead, what you want is fruit production, and for it to happen on a tree that makes harvesting as plentiful and easy as possible. Therefore, I recommend the first season includes a pruning to a single stem if possible. This is known as a central leader. To be sure, there are times when it won't be possible, and there are other times when it's actually best not to prune to a single leader. I'll show some examples in a moment. But in most cases, I've found it's best to help the tree put all of its energy into just one trunk. This will help the tree grow taller, faster, and may be the difference between 2 to 3 years in terms of first production of harvestable fruit. As just mentioned, whether your grafts take or not is almost irrelevant to the tree. In my other videos on top working, I mentioned that cutting back a beautiful, fully formed tree is one of the hardest things to convince yourself it's okay to do when you start out. However, once you've been able to force yourself to do it a couple times and you see what happens, you'll lose that fear pretty quickly. An apple tree that's cut back hard will more than make up for it by sending out hundreds of shoots anywhere it's been cut. It's quite remarkable actually, and is a testament to the inherent instinct of all living things to keep on living, even when horribly traumatized, like in the case of a tree waking up from winter to find that some enterprising homesteader thought it a good idea to cut off all its branches, the things that hold its leaves, which are the way it gets food. Here's a good example. I hacked off this branch and the graft clearly didn't take. I have no idea why. But the tree sent out all this new growth to try and make new branches. Here I hacked off the branch and the graft did take. But the tree still sent out all that new growth. This is why you need to prune. The tree is putting enormous efforts into creating new scaffolding upon which to set leaves to gather sunlight. I want all that energy to go only into the grafted scion so it gets as big as possible, as quickly as possible. So I'm going to get rid of all the other growth. The same is true all over the tree. Again, in most cases, you want to cut back your tree to a single leader. On several trees, like this one in the cider orchard, I've put multiple varieties on the same tree, but I'm pruning each variety to 1 leader. Since I generally graft scion with at least 2 buds, when both of those buds produce shoots, it's usually necessary to pick the best one and get rid of the other. The word best here is subjective and can mean different things across your orchard or even across the same tree. Best might be biggest and healthiest, that's showing the most growth, but it may instead be the branch that seems weaker, but is growing in the direction you want for the overall vision of the tree. Take your time when making these types of decisions. After all, you've grafted onto full-sized rootstock like Melisantkonovka. You've planted a tree that will potentially be in this spot for more than 2 centuries, and that's worth a few extra moments to get it right. In this example, I have 3 pieces of scion, all the same variety, and I have to choose one. I have no idea why, but this one is clearly displaying the strongest growth. In this case, that strong growth is also leading in the direction I want, away from these other grafts, meaning I have less potential for crowding later in the tree's production life. Just like when you pruned off growth back in the spring to do the grafting, when you decide to help the tree put energy into a single shoot, you need to be merciless when pruning out the rest. I know it can be difficult to jump this hurdle, but remember 2 things. First, everything you leave the tree will put energy into. And second, don't forget the trees I've shown you that prove that the tree will put out new growth no matter what. It's almost impossible to kill a tree by pruning off shoots as long as you leave one, but you only need to leave one. I'm going to cut off these 2 grafts. Before I do, however, I'm going to prune the remainder of the scion from the graft I'm keeping. The reason being that pruning is a fairly disruptive act. If I jostle the scion too much, only a couple months after making it, I break the tenuous union. Before cutting off the others, I like to make sure this doesn't happen. Once I've successfully removed this section, which is dead and will invite rot if I leave it, I can then confidently remove the other 2 grafts, which, if left in place, will crowd the tree to the point where fungus and other problems may abound in the future. Finally, I've thrown in a lot of caveats in this video, and here's a great example. After examining this tree for several minutes, I just can't decide which branches I want to leave. So, I'm just going to leave it for now and let the tree do a little more work before I decide.